Well, it's a real pleasure to announce that Paul Clement has agreed to join us tonight in the latest InStat webinar. And it's no understatement to say that Paul has coached at some of the world's leading clubs and has a wealth of experience in terms of coaching and managing. Paul, how are you this evening?
Yeah, good, Neil. Thank you. Thanks for having me on, and looking forward to talking to you this evening.
Brilliant. As as a starter, could you perhaps explain to us, your career journey and your career path to date? We know that you've worked at the highest level, but how did it all begin, and how did your career develop?
Well, my playing career won't take very long to explain. Couple of seconds. Coaching career might take a little bit longer. I think, like a lot of young lads, I had ambition to be a professional footballer, but knew quite early on, around 14, 15 years old, I wasn't going to have probably enough talent to get me to the level that I wanted. So I decided pretty early on to take another path. But having a great love of sport and football particularly, I decided to continue with my education, A-levels, university, where I studied sports science. And then eventually I trained to be a teacher of physical education. And alongside that, really embarked on a long journey of developing to become a coach, which started with coaching qualifications through the Football Association. But my first full-time job was in a secondary school, teaching PE. A job that I enjoyed, and I think provided me with a lot of great foundations for what I would end up doing longer term. My first job in football was actually grassroots football, and I worked for a few different clubs, Wimbledon, Aston Villa and Chelsea. And Chelsea was my real first opportunity, where I worked part-time in their Centre of Excellence between 1995 and 2000. And during those years, alongside my teaching, I kind of decided that football was the pathway that I wanted to follow as a professional coach. And my first full-time job was at Fulham, and I spent 6 years there in the academy. Very enjoyable time, range of different jobs, from education and welfare to running the academy for the 9 to 16 age groups, and then towards the latter time there, I was the youth team coach, under 18s. And then I went back to Chelsea. Mourinho was the manager at the time. It was 2007. And my career really accelerated at that time. After 4 years, I went from being the under 16 coach, to the assistant first team coach. So did the under 18 job, did the reserve team job, and then eventually with the first team, and that was my first time that I'd worked with sort of senior players. Big step up, great learning experience, and for the last 10 years, I've been an assistant at some of the biggest clubs to Carlo Ancelotti, great mentor and friend of mine, and more recently been a manager in my own right.
Well, that's the thing, Paul, that there are differences in coaching and managing, really, and you've touched on it already. Your career path is extraordinary, actually, that's so varied, and you've got a rounded set of qualities and skills, but you can coach, as you say, 16s, 18s, which is one skill set. But then when you're coaching or managing elite players, I'm sure there's a different approach when it comes to handling top players. Can you kind of highlight or explain slight differences in the approach to coaching and managing in general, but also between, of course, academy level players and the top level players, the elite players?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, there was a big, it was quite a shock to me, actually, to go from academy football into that first team setup at Chelsea. It was a completely different environment. There's a fantastic training ground at Chelsea, and everyone's on one site, but they're two separate buildings for the academy and for the first team. So I'd moved across like some of the young players did, from the academy into the first team building. And I found it quite different early on, because I'd been in an environment that was about nurturing development, where patience was very important. And although winning was important, it wasn't the most important thing. And then when you go in the first team, that's actually the opposite. Winning's everything. And, that brings a certain amount of pressure and stress on all the players and also on the staff as well. So I found that quite hard initially. And there had to be a real recalibration for me. And at times it was very uncomfortable. And when I look back on my career, I think that was one of the standout moments for me, going from academy football to first team football at Chelsea, where, I really, really was uncomfortable at times, but, got through it and look back at it and think, cool, that was a massive learning experience. And at that time, Chelsea's first team squad was very, very mature and established. I think you had 5 to 6 different captains of their national teams. There was John Terry, there was Ballack and Drogba and Peter Cech and Michael Essien, and a lot of maturity in the team. Lampard, Ashley Cole. It was a fantastic side, Anelka, and not the easiest environment for a first-time coach at that level. But I've got to say, the players were fantastic, very professional, very driven. And I learned a lot about myself, and I learned a lot from Carlo, who was very supportive of me. Unfortunately, in that first year, we were very successful. We won the Premier League and we won the FA Cup as well. So it was a really, really special time. Just going back to the other question about assistant and manager, well, I never really set out to become a manager. It was, it was always about being a coach, really. Initially at academy level, but then at first team level. Then after a few years, I thought, I'd like to have that opportunity and give it a go. And I thought I'd done enough to prepare me in terms of informal and formal education, as well as experience. But really nothing could have prepared me for being a manager. And I heard a great quote recently. It was actually Eddie Jones, the England rugby coach, quoting an American football coach called Chip Kelly, who said, "When I was an assistant, I was the smartest guy in the room. But when I became the head coach, I realized I didn't know anything." And unless you've done both the jobs, you can't empathize with what it's like to be a head coach or manager compared to an assistant. For me, the professions they're different professions. Although you're in the same industry, you're working with a first team in professional football, the jobs are completely different. And most of that is regarding the responsibility and accountability it comes with being a manager and dealing with the pressure that's associated with that compared to what it's like coaching.
Yeah, no, I've heard that before many times, that at various levels, nothing can prepare you for the manager's role, because it is a role of high responsibility. And one thing that was interesting, you mentioned, it was similar to another guest we had on, Pete Shuttleworth. That there are moments when you look back, and you said that, you perhaps moved out of the comfort zone going from the academy to the first team, but you managed to overcome these challenges and have a successful career and kick on from there. And it was similar to what Pete said. He moved from a kind of teaching background like yourself, I suppose, and physical education into analysis. And a lot of the work, I suppose, is you need to learn on the job. You're put into a position, and when you're a quick learner and you've got good people around you, like you say at Chelsea, you had excellent people around you, the players, of course, and obviously Carlo, who we'll mention now, and you've got a great relationship with Carlo, and you've been his assistant for such a long time at top clubs. These are the best clubs in the world: Real Madrid, Chelsea, Paris Saint-Germain, Bayern Munich, FC Hollywood. It's incredible the level that you guys have coached at and been successful at. what would you say, or how would you describe coaching with Carlo? What would you say were were his best qualities, and how did the relationship kind of nurture at the beginning, or how did it all start?
Well, yeah, I was coaching the reserve team at Chelsea, and Luis Felipe Scolari the previous season had been removed from his duties, and Gus Hiddink came in as a temporary coach from the February through to the May. Ray Wilkins was his assistant, and they asked me to step up and help with some responsibilities with the first team. So I had a little bit of experience before Carlo arrived. When Carlo arrived, I thought that it would be normal that I go back to coach with the reserves, because I didn't have that much experience at that level. I'd only done the job for about 6 months when Brendan Rodgers left and went to Watford as manager. But I was asked, because Carlo arrived just with one other member of staff who was non-field based, Bruno Di Michelis, who's a sports psychologist. So Ray Wilkins continued on as assistant to Carlo, and then they needed another coach. So, Carlo asked me to, do the first couple of weeks of pre-season. And we went on a trip to the United States, played some really high-level games. And after that 2 weeks, it's kind of like a trial, I suppose, that he wanted to have a look at me and get to know me a little bit better. And also, it was good for me that I wanted to see if I saw myself in the role longer term. Actually, I came back and thought, I think it's probably best I go with the reserves, because I was going through that period of not feeling that comfortable. And he said, look, you're going to have a great experience. You're going to learn a lot. Stay with me. And then it was obviously too good to turn down that opportunity. And it was the start of 7 years working with Carlo at various clubs. Early on, I think he gave me a lot of confidence and belief that I could operate at that level. And that was important. And I think that's one of these great qualities as a coach and a person, Carlo, is about relationships. And I saw him in action at lots of clubs with lots of different players, different nationalities, different cultures, lots of different members of staff. And he was very good at establishing relationships with people. And he was able to do that in lots of different languages. When he arrived at Chelsea, his English was very limited, was actually studying. And that's one of the things I respected him. It was just before he was 50, he came to Chelsea, 50 years old. So, not young by any stretch of the imagination in terms of learning new skills, and especially languages. But he worked really hard to get his English to a higher level. And he did that, and you see him now speaking, good English as manager of Everton. And he did the same when he went to Paris with the French, and to Spain with the Spanish. A little bit more challenging with the German, but again, we all tried. And I think that is a profile of a really top modern coach. You see it with Mourinho, you see it with Guardiola. Fantastic grasp of different languages, very important in a multicultural dressing room, that you can communicate very, very effectively. And I saw it with Gus Hiddink as well. Fantastic with the languages. So very good at building relationships. And I think the communication skills with language was a big help in that.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that many people say. When you deal with lower level players, perhaps you have to be more of a coach to develop them or organise them. But when you're dealing with top level players, it's about managing individuals or people a lot of the time as well. And clearly, Carlo adapting very quickly in terms of trying to learn the language and establish those relationships with the players. It must be absolute key when you're dealing with top players and top clubs. I remember you also mentioned before that Carlo, something else he had was, and this is a real good quality to have at those type of level of clubs, is a real calmness under pressure. Because at these clubs, winning is expected and demanded. And I suppose, again, that's something that a manager needs to have, and Carlo had it in abundance. I remember you saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all the top managers who have been extremely successful over a long period have an abundance of qualities. But I would say that Carlo certainly had some super strengths, and one was his ability to build relationships, and another one was to be able to deal with pressure. And I didn't really empathise with this to the level that probably I should have until I became a manager myself. I managed some good clubs, but he was managing clubs on another level. From his time at Reggiano started, but then Parma, and then the clubs got really big: Juventus, Milan, Chelsea, PSG, and it's continued on. You see Real Madrid, Bayern, Napoli, massive clubs, Everton now, really, really big clubs. And there's a huge amount of scrutiny at those huge European clubs. You're expected to win titles. You're expected to win every game. You're expected to win and play well. And everything is looked at under a microscope, particularly at Madrid. I haven't worked in Italy, and I know that the press are strong there. But if you look at Real Madrid, there's 2 newspapers that have to fill 14 to 16 pages of content on the club every day, and then there's the radio and the TV. There's a lot going on, and you've got to be on top of that. Big demand from the fans. They're used to winning. They're used to seeing top players performing, and ultimate accountability and responsibilities on the head coach to make sure that's happening. And I thought he dealt with that brilliantly. And I saw him at his best, and at his calmest and most under control in some of the most high pressure situations. And the Champions League final is an example of that. Losing 1-0 at half time. I saw him super cool in the dressing room. Maybe it was different inside what he was feeling, but he certainly portrayed a calmness that spread to the players and gave them confidence that they would go on and do very well in the second half of that game.
Yeah, that is the thing. It is, again, it's a management technique that Carlo has, and it's important. As if you were agitated, it might reach the players. But having that sense of calm and that sense of belief in yourself and the players, it will feed through to the team, and obviously that was a great result to win the Champions League. You touched on it a little bit at Real Madrid, but a kind of different version of the question is, at each of all of the top clubs you've been at, was there any one of those that were extremely memorable or enjoyable in terms of the period of time that you spent there?
They were all special for different reasons. Chelsea, it was the club that I'd spent many years working with in the academy, and then to be successful with the first team was special. Going abroad for the first time and working in Paris, winning the title for the first time in 19 years. I mean, they're absolutely dominant now, and they're expected to win the league at least every year. But when we arrived, they hadn't won it for 19 years. So to deliver that was fantastic, and the joy in the fans and the city was amazing. And I think we were part of the new development and the new story of PSG now. And they're one of the great European sides, no question. Real Madrid was particularly special because, the history of the club, the size of the club, the players that have played for the club previously and were playing for it when we arrived. For me, it's the ultimate club to work for. For me, there's no bigger. There are big clubs, of course, Manchester United, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, the biggest, Milan, Juventus, of course, huge clubs. But for me, there's no bigger than Real Madrid. So to go into that environment was weird at first, but strangely enough became normal very quickly, because that's what happens when you go to a club. It's very similar. You're at the training ground, you're at stadiums, you travel, and you get into that routine of planning, preparing, performing, and the cycle just continues. But it was particularly special, especially 2014, where we won the Champions League, the Spanish Cup, and then went on to win the European Super Cup and also World Club Championship. So 4 trophies in a year with a really special team of players was great experience, great memory.
Yeah. Well, you highlighted, of course, the preparation for matches and elite clubs. It needs to be spot on because, everyone wants to beat the top clubs. So you need to be prepared. The clubs you've coached at, I'm pretty sure we've got Chelsea, PSG, and Real Madrid as clients. How important is the role of data, statistical analysis for clubs in terms of match preparation and post-match analysis of performance?
Well, I'd have to say, I mean, with the exception of coaching and teaching on the field and preparing, I would say video is probably this is my opinion. Video probably is the single most important tool available, I think, to a coach in terms of the work that he does in improving and developing the team. And that's obviously, you've got training video, you've got your match video, so your performance, but then you've also got video of opposition. And I think it's also great to use video for elite examples, great performing teams, players, and actions that you can use to show your own players as well. So I think the video is a massive part of the way that I work in support of what goes on the training field and outside, obviously, the game itself. I think when you look at statistics and data, a very important part of the modern game, and I would say it's part of the bigger picture. And if you break the picture down into like a puzzle, it's an important part of the modern game, as is physical training, sports psychology, managing players' lifestyle, personal development plans. There's so many things now, and the game's become so much more professional, and I think will continue to move in that direction compared to how it was 25 years ago when I started in the game, where there weren't even full-time goalkeeper coaches, there weren't full-time fitness coaches. So the way the game's evolved in the last 25 years has been absolutely incredible. I think statistics and data are an important part of the evolution of the game. The way that it is working, particularly in football, I think is improved incredibly even in the last 10 years. I don't think it's at the level that is used in some other sports. And if you use some of the American team sports, baseball, basketball, American football, I think they're far more advanced in terms of the way they use data and statistics. And I think that's not because football is lagged behind on purpose. I think it's also the nature of the sport. Baseball, for example, is a very easy game to collect data and also use data to improve performance, because there's only 3 actions really. There's a fielding, a throwing action, there's a hitting action, there's a fielding action, and then it's pretty closed. Basketball and American football a little bit less so, but there's still a lot of structure. Football, there's so many more moving parts, and I think from a tactical point of view, it is more challenging to collect data. But there's still a lot of positives, and I've used it, particularly since I've been a manager. Mm-hmm. What I've tried to do is to avoid the danger of being flooded by numbers that I don't understand. The more simple, the better for me. But the starting point for me is always, what's the style of play, and what are you trying to measure? And once you've got that as a starting point, it's easier to then measure those things. And then you look back and say, well, this is the way we want to play. These are the things we want to measure. What are the numbers? So I try and use it in that way. I think the people or the person, depends on the size of the club, how many people you have working in this side of things, are actually more important than the numbers themselves. Because, you know, a lot of the people that are working with the data are very bright minds, you know, mathematicians, economist type backgrounds, very clever. And it's important for them to make the numbers real for the coaches, make sense of the numbers, because they can become very, very complicated and very difficult to use otherwise.
Yeah, no, I've heard that said before, actually, Paul. You know that it's, you know, and you know it's clear you're only as good as the staff round about you in a lot of ways, and the, you know, the people that supply you with that data, and quite often, as you touched on, a lot of the managers, they really only want headline numbers or key parameters or statistics. So in that way, it is important to have good people in the backroom staff behind you. We also provide and prepare reports, you know, particularly post-match reports that managers quite like to see to check players' performances. And again, there's a bit of depth in it, but that's really the role of the post-match analyst to condense that and make it or prepare it in a form that's user-friendly for the manager. And as you say, we help clubs in that regard, and we facilitate it. But ultimately, as you say, it's for an analyst to make that a more user friendly type of report, so that the coach can go over the key parameters rather than drilling into things in too much depth. So would it be fair to say then, in your roles at the clubs, you used video more often than not? So in that regard, perhaps, you know, maybe sharing clips with players or editing clips and showing them perhaps tactical situations which they could improve, or tactical things that they did well. I take it then that's you know, how you used InStat in that way was really more in terms of showing players video clips, or using that kind of analysis.
Well, I mean, I started to use InStat when I was at Real Madrid. Alexander Ivansky came to the club. He presented the platform, and you know, I just thought it was a fantastic tool. So there was another big, another leading company in the market as well that was providing a lot of video. But what I liked about InStat is, and I still do to this day, it's like a one-stop shop for, you know, video, for statistics, for information about individual players, for information about teams. And I like the way it's evolved and developed over the time as well. So, you know, when I first started to work with Alexander, you know, you'd give him a couple of things that you felt that would be useful for you as a coach working with the tool, like just simple things in the early days, like, you know, it'd be useful in terms of time to have a video with ball in play only. You know, so that was put in place. I said, you know, spoke to him about it'd be nice to have a tool where you could take a snapshot of the screen, and then you could export that into another document and then annotate onto it, so you're using a graphic rather than video. And then that was put in place, and they're just a couple of small things. I mean, since then there's been tremendous innovation in terms of what you can do just using the platform. And that's important for big clubs, but it's so important for smaller clubs as well, where you don't have, you know, so much manpower, you don't have all the different software. You can do all of this inside InStat, and I like the way that the company's innovated over time as well.
Yeah, but I think that's the reason for that, of course, is customer feedback, like yourselves. And, you know, to be honest, there's no better person to come and present the platform to you than the owner and founder, Mr. Ivansky. But so, you know, we're always listening to customer feedback. Only recently, actually, one of the clubs in League One had asked us to see if we could change certain things, or if things were going to be added onto the platform. And and it was done. It was probably in development, but you know, we always listen to customer feedback and try and evolve. And as you say, actually, you know, as a one-stop shop in the sense, you know, you have the video, you can edit the video, you have data, statistics, you can use the platform for opposition match analysis as well. For example, as you say, we've spoken with people in National League, for example, and they don't have a lot of staff, so it might be a manager, one assistant, and it's difficult maybe for them to get out to games, but they can use the InStat system to see their next opponent, their last 3 games, 5 games, video, stats, be able to break it down easily through an episode search. So, I mean, you're absolutely spot on. You know, from the video platform is especially useful for elite clubs, for example, but you know, all the way down to like the 7th tier, if you say a bit of English football, there's a definite use for the system, which obviously you've identified. What would you say then overall were the sort of strengths of the InStat product? What are the kind of key points that you like, or perhaps sets us apart from other providers, for example?
Well, I like a lot of I like the functionality of the platform. I think it's simple, it's clean, nicely presentable, and it's the go-to place for me to find the information that I want to find. I like things like you know, there's so many of the games that are available in, you know, high quality video, HD. I think there's nothing worse than when you're watching a game as a coach and the game's not in high quality video, because sometimes you can't make out, you know, the names or the numbers on the back of the shirts, and you don't know which players who. That can be challenging. Over time, the InStat index, I think I found very interesting. At the start, I was having difficulty understanding how that the number was achieved. But a couple of conversations with Alexander explained to me the algorithm behind it. And what I found with the InStat index is that the more I used it, the more I understood it. And you begin to be able to benchmark players. And I think that's really interesting from a player recruitment point of view, that when there's so many players around the world that you're potentially looking at for your own team, is to be able to filter through the large numbers and use that as part of your process in recruitment is very important. I think it would be unwise, and I would never use this where you're only relying on the numbers. I think the numbers are important and they can provide some insights, but I always like to use the formula of eyes, ears, and numbers. So your eyes are obviously yourself and your other coaching staff and your recruitment staff. They're there, they're watching games, they're watching them on video, they're watching live games. Live games are, you know, so important. Your ears are, you know, you're gathering intel, whether that's character witnesses, it's through journalists, about finding out about, you know, the players. And the numbers as well. So the numbers, obviously, the statistics. And when you put all those three together, you're gathering great information that can provide insight, which will help you out, you know, make good decisions.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's absolutely correct. You know, there is a whole process to it, and as you say, in InStat we have the video and the statistical part. Beyond that, gathering intelligence is for the club. But interestingly, regarding the InStat index, I was recently at a club and they played a game. It was a high-profile game a few months ago, and watching the game with the naked eye, you could tell one player in particular stood out with the naked eye. So it was a little bit of a test to see, all right, well, let's check the InStat indexes for that game and see how the InStat index rated the players. And lo and behold, actually, this player was top ranked player in the team. So actually, the InStat index, according to the statistical parameters, the algorithm, actually matched up with the naked eye view on the day, which was particularly pleasing, you know, because sometimes it might not always be the case, but it certainly in that case, the InStat index was very, very accurate. depending on the eye, what you saw in the day, which was very interesting to note. One thing I think you mentioned before as well, Paul, was part of the strength or part of the reason you liked InStat was the breadth of the coverage and the content and the amount of leagues that we have. Is that something that you've used or encountered in the past with the clubs that you've coached and managed that?
I mean, yeah, it's absolutely incredible how many games are available, and historically how far they go back as well. And when you're making important decisions on, when you talk about player recruitment and you want that historical data, there's so much information available, and it seems like the games are getting covered in every corner of the globe. I mean, just when you go on that map, that navigational map at the start, when you see the leagues, I mean, there's leagues that I didn't even know existed, and teams and players as well. So it's certainly got fantastic detail and depth. And not every club is recruiting from or watching games at the very top level in the top 5 leagues of Europe. There are leagues all around the world, and there are good players there, and they're important. It's also important information for coaches to be able to operate in those leagues as well.
No, I think that's a fair point. The top clubs, of course, can afford players in the top 5 leagues, but as you go slightly further down the levels, then perhaps finding an interesting player or a player statistically that shows up well in our system that can be more affordable from perhaps a less fashionable country is also quite important. And actually touching on the historical part in terms of the amount of games that we have in the system. I recently did a presentation for a coach, and he asked me, if we had footage of Jordan Pickford playing for England under 21s, because he remembered him coming, taking across, kicking early, and the striker scoring straight from the fast break, the fast kick. And I asked him, I said, well, any idea of the date? And he told me it was like between October and November, I think it was 2016 or 2015. So in the advanced selection of matches, we selected the dates, and lo and behold, there was the match, England-Romania, and the action was easy to find because it was an assist. And, that is an example, as you say, of how you can find historic data or matches and that actual specific match incident we could get, which was particularly pleasing, to be quite honest. So yeah, I mean, the breadth of content on the platform is quite exceptional. And just looking to the future, Paul, have you got any future plans coming up? Are you looking to get back into being a manager? Or are you looking more to go down the coaching side of the game? What are your plans for the future?
Well, yeah, very motivated to start, coaching again soon. I'd like that to be as a head coach. I've had a number of different offers over the last year or so, and I'm waiting for the right one. And that's important for me. That the next challenge is as close to the right one as possible. So I'm willing to be patient to get that one, but very excited to be looking forward to getting back on the grass again. But I've also enjoyed the last months as well. Not so much during this period of lockdown, but certainly a period of reflection in my career. The first time in over 25 years, I've had this time just to slow down a little bit and look at the journey that I've been on, and big period of reflection. Things that I think I've done well, things that I've not done so well, and looking to do better in the future.
No, I think it is important. You hear a lot from people involved in football that the pressure, it can be mentally draining over a period of time, and if you've been involved continually with clubs over such a long period of time, sometimes it does take or it is important to recharge the batteries, and as you say, the next move or the next appointment is very important for you in your career. So I'm sure you'll take the time and make the right decision, and hopefully when you do get back in the grass, you'll come to us at InStat for your video and data analysis tools.
I should have a lifetime membership with InStat for the clubs that I've used it at. So no, InStat's always been very good for me. I have a great relationship, and I'm sure it will continue well into the future.
Yeah, no, we hope so. We definitely hope so, Paul. And I really appreciate you giving up your time. And as I said at the beginning, it's a real joy and pleasure to have someone, as I say, a gentleman and someone who's coached at the highest level at clubs. So we really, at InStat, we really appreciate it and are grateful for you giving up your time for us tonight.
It's a pleasure, Neil. Anytime.
Okay. No, thanks, Paul. Thanks, and
all the best.
Bye now. Bye.
Bye.